Silence arrived the way dusk does, soft at first, then everywhere. It settled on the couch between two bodies that had memorized each other's warmth, touched the picture frames, pressed its thumb against every thought that might have become a sentence. The room knew the way love had lived there. 2 mugs, 1 chipped. Music left paused on the exact second a laugh had broken through, a sweater falling off the chair like a sleepy promise. And then Pride came, wearing perfect posture, all straight lines and sharp edges, and the air turned thin. Words had been ready, neat words, rehearsed words, the kind that pretend to be brave. They lined up like soldiers, but at the last moment, the tongue refused to betray the heart. So Silence spoke instead. Silence said, "Look at the way the hands are still shaking." Silence said, "Notice the way the chest tightens whenever footsteps pass the door." Silence said, "This isn't absence. This is a storm waiting for thunder." Nights lengthened. Clocks kept immaculate time, but time itself misbehaved, looping back to the same 3 seconds. A door closing, a breath caught, an unsent message glowing like a lighthouse no one admits to seeing. On the street, strangers moved in their separate weather. Inside the ribs, rain continued. Memory turned domestic objects into altars. A spoon, a worn-out hoodie, the sliver of light beneath a bathroom door that once meant someone is here. Someone is singing. Someone is alive and near enough to touch. Pride insisted that solitude was a kind of victory. Silence knew better. Silence knew the victory belonged to whatever survived the ache. There were mornings when the sun made generous attempts, spilling itself across the bed like a faithful friend. The sheets inhaled warmth, but the pillows kept the shape of a missing shoulder. Pride curated playlists of distraction, filled hours with small triumphs, lined shelves with books whose pages turned without landing anywhere. But a name, never spoken aloud, kept its own weather inside the mouth. A song on the radio mispronounced luck as love. A barista asked, "The usual?" And a heart tripped over the memory of another voice answering, "Make it 2." Silence followed to the market, to the bus stop, to the mirror where a face looked back and refused to lie. "You are fine," Pride insisted. The mirror reflected a truth that didn't need vocabulary. Fine is a word people use when they're drowning. Distance played its tricks. Miles multiplied like rumors, yet certain moments arrived right on time with perfect clarity. That first winter afternoon when hands warmed other hands without asking permission. That almost argument that dissolved into shared laughter because both saw how ridiculous it was to fight when the only real fight had already been won by love. That habit of resting foreheads together like a quiet prayer. Silence replayed these not to torment, but to testify. Love had happened. Love had built something with both sets of hands. Love had left fingerprints on every doorknob. Pride tried a different tactic. Pride drafted texts with clever edges and left them unsent, as if control were a talisman. Pride taught the spine to stay straight when the phone lit up, when a familiar notification pattern flashed. "Wait," Pride said. "Wait and prove this isn't need." But Silence remembered how need, when stripped of ego, becomes the most honest part of devotion. Silence remembered a night of rain and city lights smeared like watercolor, the way 2 bodies fit not like puzzle pieces, but like 2 halves of a prayer. Nothing explicit, nothing performed, just breathing that found a rhythm and stayed there, soft and certain. Silence said, "Distance is not depth." Silence said, "The soul recognizes home by feel, not by proof." Sleep arrived like an unreliable narrator, promising rest, delivering fragments. Dreams refused to follow the rules. In one, 2 strangers sat side by side on a train and never looked at each other, yet a current hummed between their shoulders, a steady voltage of yes. In another, a familiar jacket appeared at the end of a long hallway, and the hallway kept growing no matter how fast the feet moved. Waking hurt less than dreaming, except on the mornings when waking brought the scent of coffee that wasn't there. The mind can be cruel that way, placing a ghost in the mouth of the cup. Friends made the right noises. "Time heals," they said, like time were a paramedic with infinite gauze. Go out, try new things, remember who you are. Their care mattered, and gratitude bloomed for it. But there are certain rooms that admit only two, and the truth was already seated in one of those chairs. Silence stayed. Silence kept watch. Silence held the door open for something not yet ready to speak. Then the universe mischieved its way into mercy. A street no one meant to walk. A bookstore no one planned to enter. A turning of the head at the exact second a familiar silhouette passed the window. No orchestral swell, no cinematic framing, just the quiet click of inevitability. The body knew first. Breath altered. Gravity shifted. Pride tried to lift its chin, but the heart had already moved toward the door. Crossing that threshold required everything and nothing. Not a single sentence seemed adequate. Not a single sentence seemed necessary. Eyes carried an entire language they hadn't forgotten. The distance closed in the way tide closes around ankles, slow enough to feel each separate degree, fast enough to erase footprints. Silence had prepared the moment for days, weeks, months, polishing it until it shone like a small, stubborn jewel. There was still pain. Love doesn't make false promises. There was apology inside the gaze, not as a performance, but as a simple offering. Look, this is the soft underbelly of intention. This is where it went wrong. This is where it kept beating anyway. Hands hovered before they touched, as if asking permission from air. When they finally met, the body remembered the map. Pulse aligned, shoulders softened. The familiar became new without pretending it was brand new. There's a difference between starting over and continuing honestly. The heart, wiser now, chose the second. Words arrived last, as they should. Not speeches, just the small essential kind. Missed, thought of, kept, believed, stayed. None of them tried to rewrite history. All of them tried to write the next hour with care. Pride strangely didn't protest. Perhaps pride had grown tired of carrying armor into rooms that needed skin. Perhaps pride had learned reverence. Either way, it stepped aside. What followed wasn't fireworks. It was something closer to a candle lit at noon. Unnecessary, perhaps, but somehow right. Presence, mundane and holy, took up space again. Doing nothing together became a sacrament. Washing dishes to the rhythm of a shared playlist, leaning shoulder to shoulder while the kettle moaned, reading different books with feet touching under a blanket. The body remembered tenderness and made it routine, not spectacle. The soul noticed how breaths matched without counting. The room, relieved, returned to being a room, instead of an echo chamber for unsaid things. Of course, fear checked in. Fear asked questions. What if this is another loop? What if silence returns with teeth? The answer didn't come as a manifesto. It came as practice. It came as a hand reaching for another hand at the first sign of retreat. It came as the miracle of a voice saying goodnight and meaning tomorrow. It came as the discipline of returning, again and again, to the small table where 2 cups cooled and conversation warmed. Love, it turned out, wasn't a grand gesture but a daily one, an honest leaning toward what aches and heals in the same breath. There are storms that destroy and storms that clarify. This one did both, then asked for devotion anyway. The lessons were etched softly but permanently, that silence can be a bridge instead of a wall, if listened to. That pride can protect but also imprison. That distance can measure miles but never measure truth. That surrender is not defeat when it is offered to what is already home. And yes, that a single glance in a window can undo 100 carefully built defenses. Not because love is reckless, but because love is precise. It recognizes its own and chooses. No vows were exchanged in that moment. Only a quiet agreement signed in breath and pulse. Guard what matters. Say what hurts before it hardens. Stay soft where the world demands edges. The storm still exists somewhere on the horizon. Storms always do. But inside this room, the air has weight again. The kind that settles on shoulders like a blessing. The kind that hums when 2 foreheads touch, and silence finally learns to rest. And in that silence, love answered. Anger always comes first. It walks in wearing certainty, speaking in tones that sound like justice. The words spill out fast and sharp, like they've been waiting in the dark for their cue. Faces harden, breaths shorten, and every heartbeat sounds like an argument. Somewhere behind all of it, emotion hides, trembling but proud. It wants to speak, but ego shouts louder, declaring that love doesn't get to win this time. The air fills with things meant to wound, and even while they're being said, there's an ache underneath that whispers, "Please don't make me mean this." Pride is a careful architect. It builds walls out of silence and doors that only lock from the inside. It feels powerful at first, standing tall behind those walls. It tells the heart that boundaries are strength, that detachment is wisdom, but nights grow long in those echoing rooms. Laughter becomes memory, warmth turns to draft, and the body starts to miss what the mind pretends to forget. Pride doesn't know what to do with loneliness. It wasn't built for that. So it paints over it with plans and distractions, trying to make distance look like healing. Emotion doesn't stop searching, though. It slips through the cracks pride can't seal. It arrives as a song that shouldn't hurt but does. It hides in the scent of rain or the way someone's laughter in a cafe sounds just close enough to awaken something buried. Every reminder becomes a ghost with kind eyes, and pride flinches each time it sees one. Still, it refuses to kneel. To admit longing feels like surrender, and surrender feels like losing. Yet deep down, emotion keeps whispering. Love was never a competition. Days pass in quiet battles. The heart tries to move on. The ego polishes its armor. But memory keeps finding ways back in. The smallest things undo the hardest efforts. A street name, a familiar perfume, a single message typed and erased before sending. It's strange how much can be said in what's left unsent. Every pause, every hesitation, carries the weight of everything still felt. Emotion lingers there, waiting for the moment pride finally tires of pretending not to care. The war between ego and emotion is never fair. Ego fights with logic while emotion bleeds with truth. There's a night when it becomes too heavy to ignore. The anger fades, leaving exhaustion in its place. Pride looks around and realizes it's been guarding emptiness. The body is safe, but the soul feels hollow. And in that hollow space, something starts to echo, softly, then louder. The memory of being understood without speaking, of being seen without asking. It's then that ego begins to understand what it has cost to win. Love doesn't beg, but it waits. It waits at the edge of every decision, patient but persistent. It doesn't demand return, only recognition. The realization comes quietly, without fanfare. One morning, the light hits differently. One breath feels heavier. The thought of them doesn't sting as much as it aches, deep and slow, like the pulse of something that never truly died. Pride calls it weakness, but emotion knows better. It's not weakness to feel. It's proof of being alive. When two people love each other deeply, goodbye is never final. The mind can draw lines, but the heart keeps finding ways to cross them. There's a magnetic pull that logic can't name, a gravitational truth that keeps bending both back toward the same center. It's not about need, it's about connection. The kind that feels carved into existence itself. Every heartbeat feels like a small rebellion against letting go. Then comes the breaking point. It's not loud. It's not cinematic. It's a single moment where silence feels unbearable. The hands that once built walls begin to shake. Pride finally sees what emotion has been trying to say all along. That holding on to pain doesn't protect, it only prolongs suffering. There's a stillness right before the surrender, like the hush before rain, and then something shifts. The heart, tired of its own armor, lets itself feel everything it's been holding back. The first step toward reconciliation is rarely grand. It might be a message that just says, "Are you okay?" It might be a familiar voice breaking through the static of distance. The conversation doesn't fix everything, but it opens the door. Inside that space, ego sits quietly in the corner, watching emotion do what it was always meant to: heal. Words come softly, apologies without ceremony, truths without filters. There's no longer a need to win. There's only the desire to be understood. The reunion isn't about rewriting what happened. It's about recognizing that love never left. It only waited for both to grow enough to meet again without fear. The arguments that once felt like the end now seem like lessons in disguise. The hands that once trembled with anger now tremble with relief. The eyes that once avoided each other now meet with the familiarity of coming home. There's a quiet knowing in the air, the kind that doesn't ask for promises, only presence. Pride still lives somewhere inside, but it's softer now. It's learned humility. The kind that understands strength can coexist with vulnerability. Emotion has earned its peace, not by overpowering ego, but by teaching it how to love without losing itself. The war ends not with surrender, but with understanding, an agreement between the two halves that both were trying to protect the same heart all along. And in that realization, everything changes. The silence between words becomes comforting again. The touch that once felt dangerous now feels like belonging. The fear of losing turns into the gratitude of having. What was once broken doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. Love, in its truest form, asks for no conditions, no victories, no pride. It simply asks to be felt, fully and without defense. Sometimes losing feels heavier than staying because love doesn't weigh the same on both sides of goodbye. It lingers in the air, in the pulse, in the quiet spaces where ego finally bows to emotion. And when it does, the heart, after all its battles, finally breathes again, and in that breath, love returns. Distance has a way of testing love, of stripping it down to its truest form. When two people are apart, words become lifelines, and silence becomes a mirror that shows everything that's real. Nights stretch longer when the warmth that once slept beside you turns into a memory. The heart doesn't know what to do with that kind of absence. It starts searching for traces of presence in strange places, in the rhythm of rain, in the static between songs, in the whisper of wind against a window pane. Even when everything goes quiet, something inside still hums his name. There's a certain ache that doesn't fade with distance. It doesn't scream or break. It lingers like a gentle pulse that refuses to stop. The miles don't erase connection. They only change its form. The conversations become shorter, but the meaning grows heavier. Every good night feels like both a promise and a question. Will the feeling still be there tomorrow? And somehow it always is. It hides in the messages left unsent, in the photos never posted, in the sudden rush of breath that comes when the phone vibrates unexpectedly. Dreams become meeting places. Sometimes in the quiet of sleep, he's there, standing in a room that feels too familiar, smiling the way he used to. There's no need to speak. The dream carries the energy that words could never hold. Waking up from those dreams is both a gift and a punishment. The heart races, the pillow feels cold, but the air smells faintly of the past, as if memory left fingerprints on the morning. Days turn into a ritual of pretending. Smiling in rooms full of people who have no idea that half of you live somewhere else. Laughing at jokes that don't land because the only person who made laughter feel effortless is miles away. The world doesn't stop for heartbreak. It just expects you to walk through it like nothing's missing. But the pull never weakens. It's invisible, yes, but undeniable. A gravity that drags the mind back to where love last felt alive. The scent of his cologne once caught in a passing crowd, and for a moment, the world tilted. Everything blurred except that scent, familiar, dangerous, comforting. It was like being transported back to that night when silence wasn't awkward, when breathing the same air felt like prayer. It's strange how something so small can awaken everything believed to be buried. That's how love works when it's real. It hides in the smallest, most ordinary corners, waiting to remind you that it never left. There's comfort in routine, but even routines betray the truth. The hand still reaches for the phone before sleep, half expecting a message that never comes. Certain songs remain forbidden because they hold too many versions of what used to be. And yet, every once in a while, curiosity wins. The song plays, and suddenly the distance collapses. It's as if the melody carries him back, even just for a few minutes. The heart feels him there, not in body, but in essence. And for that brief time, the ache softens. Logic tries to reason with love. It says, move on, it says people drift. But logic forgets that love doesn't obey geography. It's not bound by time zones or maps. It's energy, invisible, constant, and alive. Some connections are written in frequencies the body can't measure. Sometimes, while staring at the night sky, there's this sense of being seen, as if miles away, eyes are lifted to the same stars, and for a heartbeat, the distance disappears. That's what love becomes when separated, an unspoken alignment, a quiet knowing that refuses to fade. There were moments of doubt, of course. Nights when the silence felt cruel, when every unanswered call echoed like rejection. Pride whispered that maybe it was all one-sided, maybe the pull existed only on one end. But then, out of nowhere, a message would arrive, short, simple, but heavy with meaning. "Thinking of you." Just 3 words, and yet they carried the entire weight of what couldn't be said. Those small moments stitched the distance together, thread by thread. The pull isn't always soft. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it drags the heart through memories that sting. But even pain can be proof of love's persistence. There's a kind of beauty in missing someone so deeply it becomes part of breathing. The ache transforms into something sacred, a reminder that love, no matter how tested, still exists. The pull stronger than distance is not about returning to what was, but recognizing what never truly left. There comes a day when the distance ends, though not always by plan. Maybe a chance encounter, maybe fate doing what fate does best, placing 2 paths back in alignment. The first sight after so long feels like time folding in on itself. The air thickens, words vanish, and suddenly all those invisible threads that stretched across cities tighten into one heartbeat. There's no grand speech, no rehearsed apology. Just eyes meeting with the kind of silence that says everything words have failed to express. The touch feels both foreign and familiar. The warmth is the same, the heartbeat still sinks, and in that moment, the miles mean nothing. Love doesn't need to explain how it survived. It just needs to be felt. The distance was never the enemy, ego was. Fear was. But love, in its quiet defiance, waited. It endured. It traveled unseen, through thoughts, through memories, through dreams, until both hearts remembered where they belonged. The story doesn't end in perfection. Love rarely does, but it continues, softer now, wiser. The pull remains, not as a force of longing, but as a reminder of connection. Even if distance returns, the hearts know they will always find their way back. Because something stronger than miles, stronger than pride, stronger than logic, keeps guiding them, and in that pull, love breathes again. When silence finally broke, it didn't arrive with grand gestures or loud apologies. It came quietly, in the way eyes met after too long pretending not to search. There's something about that kind of moment, when presence itself becomes the language both hearts had forgotten how to speak. No words were needed. The air between 2 people carried enough history, enough ache, enough love. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, alive, trembling with all the things left unsaid. Time had moved on, or at least pretended to. Life had filled itself with distractions, work, people, conversations that went nowhere, nights that ended with the same hollow ache. But underneath it all, something had stayed untouched. Love, it seemed, had refused to end. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for the moment when pride would tire of pretending to be strong. That day began like any other, ordinary, forgettable, until fate decided to turn the page. There he was, standing where memory had left him. The sight hit harder than expected, not because it was surprising, but because it felt inevitable, as if the universe had been rearranging itself for this single second of recognition. Breathing became a task, heartbeat an echo of everything once lost. The body remembered what the mind had been trying to bury, the warmth, the rhythm, the way his presence had always steadied the world. He didn't speak at first, and that silence said more than any apology could. Eyes met, not shyly, not boldly, just honestly. In that gaze was every season they'd weathered, every fight that had turned into distance, every tear that had never been seen. The past stood between them like a ghost, but for once neither looked away. The walls built by ego began to crumble, not with effort, but with quiet surrender. There's a strange kind of peace in realizing love never left. It changes shape, hides behind anger and denial, but it doesn't vanish. It lingers in energy, in timing, in the way two souls seem to find their way back no matter how far they wander. Standing there, everything that once felt heavy suddenly became clear. Love had never asked for perfection, only presence. And now, presence was finally here. He moved closer, slow enough for hesitation to have a chance to speak. But it didn't. The space between them dissolved, and with it, all the distance Pride had worked so hard to maintain. The air shifted, familiar and safe. No promises were made, no explanations offered. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something deeper, recognition. The soul recognizing its mirror. The world around them continued, indifferent to the quiet miracle unfolding. Cars passed, people laughed, a clock somewhere kept time. But in that suspended moment, none of it mattered. All that existed was the pulse, steady, synchronized, the same as it used to be. Words could have ruined it. So they stayed silent, letting presence do what years of conversation couldn't. Love, when it's real, doesn't need to restart. It simply continues, picking up where it left off, softer this time, wiser. It carries the scars of distance and the humility of loss. There's no more need to prove who was right or wrong. There's only gratitude for surviving, for remembering, for finding the way back. Later, when the air grew cooler and words finally returned, they were few. Simple things like, "Hi, you look good. It's been a while." But beneath them ran a current of something stronger, deeper. Every glance, every pause carried meaning too complex for language. Sometimes love speaks best through restraint. As the evening unfolded, conversation began to flow again. Not forced, not hesitant, just natural. Laughter returned in small bursts, shy at first, then freer. Every shared memory resurfaced like a familiar melody, not to haunt, but to remind. The closeness grew, not from touch, but from awareness. The kind of connection that breathes on its own, asking for nothing, giving everything. When the night ended, there was no dramatic confession, no desperate plea to stay, just a quiet understanding that something sacred had been restored. The heart, after all its storms, had found its calm. The silence that once hurt now felt healing. It was no longer about fixing what broke. It was about cherishing what never truly ended. Some loves don't need closure because they were never meant to close. They exist beyond explanations, beyond logic, rooted in something spiritual, something timeless. When eyes met that day, it wasn't about starting over. It was about remembering that the connection had never stopped breathing. Pride may have tried to rewrite the ending, but love had always been the author. And in that final moment, when the world softened and everything felt still, the truth became undeniable. Endings are only for stories that run out of feeling, and this one never did. If this story touched something deep inside you, don't let it fade. Hit like, share the feeling, and subscribe for more tales where love defies time, ego, and distance. Turn on the bell, because the next heartbeat might just be your story. Until then, keep loving deeply.